Justice Richard Wagner, thank you so much for being here.
Good afternoon.
Now, most of the questions you faced this past Tuesday were, of course, on Russell Brown's departure and how that puts an end to the review of his alleged conduct. You said you have concerns about transparency in the process and what the public finds out. What are the specific changes you think need to happen so that the public feels more reassured about these kind of situations?
Yeah, well, without referring to the case of Mr. Brown, because I cannot talk about that case, but generally speaking, since at least 2018, 2019, I realized that when you look at the judicial conduct process at the CJC, there was changes to be brought to the process because it was too long, too costly, and not transparent. And that's why I asked from the beginning that the Judges Act be amended so that the judicial conduct process be amended and be shortened while respecting the rights of the judge to be defended and also the right of the public to be protected. And so that's why the government introduced legislation in 2021 at the Senate. And to make a story short, after that it was called the C9 legislation. It's still before Parliament. And that legislation has several provisions to shorten the delays. So it would not be possible, for instance, to launch appeal proceedings or judicial review on any decisions rendered or released during the process. It would make the process more public. In other words, there are provisions in that legislation that would indicate when a complaint could be made public, when the results of an inquiry would make public. It will provide also that a member of the public would participate also on the hearing at different level. So overall, it's a good legislation. It is aimed at making the process more transparent so that people could understand it. And unfortunately, it's still before Parliament. And it was adopted by the House of Commons recently. It went to the Senate. The Senate is asking some amendments. Most of those amendments are dismissed by the Justice Minister. So the C9 has returned to the House of Commons and it's still there. So I wish that this legislation be adopted in the best interest of the public.
Okay, I want to turn now to judicial vacancies, another topic you've been talking about. You had written to the Prime Minister this spring on delays to getting some new names on the bench. What was the response from him?
Well, the letter followed a complaint by my 42 Chief Justices across the country during the last meeting of the CJC in April. And they realized that in all provinces there were more than 80 vacancies. Judges were not appointed. Even Chief Justices were not appointed, and Associate Chief Justices were not appointed within a reasonable delay. So I took upon myself, following my discussion with my colleagues, to advise the Prime Minister, to tell him that there is a serious problem here, and that there are consequences. And so following my letter, the Prime Minister called me, and I explained again to him that the fact that the judges were not appointed created a lot of problems in all provinces, where judges were not available to hear cases, that some other judges had to decide which cases will proceed. A judge should not be forced to do that. There's an impact also on mental health issues for judges who are overburdened by the other files. And so at the end of the day, there could be also stay of proceedings because criminal trials could not proceed within the delays of Jordan, for instance. And that brings into question the credibility of the justice system and therefore the nature of our democracy.
Are there certain regions then that have you worried? Certain provinces, certain territories?
Yeah, it's the same situation everywhere, but I must say that in Alberta, the Chief Justice of the King's Bench, Mary Morrow, advised that there were many cases which are covered by this problem, and that stay of proceedings can can result from those omissions.
So have you seen or heard anything back then from the federal government since you've written that letter that gives you more optimism in terms of getting some of these vacancies
Well,
filled?
it was quite recent. The Prime Minister called me after receiving my letter. I take some comfort in the way he addressed my letter, and we'll have to wait and see.
Okay, I want to turn to another topic that you've raised in the past, which is your concern about access to justice, especially for disadvantaged Canadians. Have you been seeing any progress over the past year or two since you first brought this out into the public sphere?
Well, access to justice is a problem that we're talking about for many, many years. And it means many, many things, you know. Access to justice means the right to the right information, to know for any member of the public to understand and know whether he or she has a right. It means also access to the courts physically, to have access to a judge. So there must be a judge available. That means also the cost to have access to a court with a reasonable budget. So it means many, many things. So there's no one single solution. There's no magic remedy. I think that it needs the efforts of every stakeholders in the justice system. The governments to properly fund the system, properly pay for the employees, the staff at the courthouse, the clerks, sheriffs, judicial assistants, and also the bar has a responsibility to promote other ways of dealing with the disputes instead of having always to go to court. The pro bono work is part of the solution. Increased legal aid would help also the access to justice. So it takes a lot of goodwill, but I think we're going in the right direction because I think that every stakeholder is now sensitive to the issue. And there are different initiatives in different provinces.
Okay, let me finish with one question about your own work on the Supreme Court. Now, of course, that Russell Brown has retired. You've got a vacancy. What does that do to your workload and the workload of your other colleagues?
Well, that means that my colleagues and I will work a bit harder in order to make sure that the fact that we miss one judge won't make a difference. But, you know, we've been sitting at 7 and 5 judges since February. As a matter of fact, the court usually sits at 7 most of the time, whereas sometimes we sit at 9 for the most important cases like the references or constitutional issues. But we will continue to render decisions up until the new appointment, and I wish, of course, that the new judge be appointed as soon as possible.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there and wait to see what happens on that front. Chief Justice Richard Wagner, I want to thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. My pleasure.